Now, of course, we're all aware of Bethesda's new review policy of not sending out review codes until the day before it comes out, but there is a NeoGAF user by the name of DMAX3901 who reported his first impressions with Dishonored 2 after receiving a copy one day before launch, as he does live in Australia. And, well, his report points to rather disappointing performance on the PC, at least for those using AMD. Now, I will link the forum thread in the description below this video, but I'm going to go through some of the key points of what he had to say. Now, I just want to say that he does begin things by saying that the graphics options are reasonably extensive and you can even disable or enable rat and bloodfly shadows. However, there is what he describes as a rather claustrophobic vignette that appears only when Emily or Colvo are crouching, which unfortunately cannot be disabled, so perhaps a concern for people who suffer from motion sickness due to a tight FOV. And despite the spectrum of options that I did mention a moment ago, they were unable to maintain a solid 60 at 1440p with their current setup, which is an R9 290, i5 4690K and 16GB of RAM. So what they settled on was 1080p with mostly high settings and some of the more demanding settings turned off, so such as volumetric lighting, depth of fields. And now this did allow them to maintain 60 FPS, however they still did dip down into the high 40s. However, things start getting weirder from there. Now, they turned all the settings down to low after they went into a particular room. Basically, they were playing at those previous settings and they leaned around the corner and the FPS dropped to 18. The settings then turned down to very low and the on-off settings went down to off and the frame rates didn't change. Now, this room they're talking about is very detailed. I don't want to show it in the video just in case, but again, their thread will be linked in the description below, and it has various flowers along various columns and there's several corpses along the floor, and also there's a lot of detail obviously in the environment itself, but there's still something a bit strange going on here with everything set to very low, almost having no impact on the frame rate. So of course they began to experiment, and if they face towards the back of the throne room they get 60, but after turning 180 degrees it drops to 32, and another back to the door for which they first entered, it goes back to 18 frames per second, and again this is on very low at 1080p. So obviously their first port of call, well, it's the drivers, right? Well, they did a clean uninstall and install the drivers specifically recommended by Bethesda for AMD. Frame rates were unaffected, sadly. So obviously they thought, oh, maybe it's just a weird issue with this one room, perhaps it'll be fixed in a day one patch. Of course they are playing it before release, so that is entirely possible, but this happens again in other large open areas and areas with a lot of detail. You know, for instance, even with the game turned down to low rather, in very large open areas, we're getting huge frame rate tanks with everything going down to low, so it is not really affected much by the settings. So this does point to some pretty intrinsic issues within the game itself, given that the changing of settings down to very low and all the on-off settings such as volumetric lighting, etc. that I went through earlier, and obviously a few others that I've not bothered to name here, did not make any impact on the performance. So in large open areas and even large rooms with a lot of detail, a lot of, you know, corpses on the floor or people walking around or just general things going on in the environment, you're seeing frame rate dip to what I would call unacceptable levels for an AMD user. So it all points to pretty disappointing performance on the PC, at least for AMD. Again, no reports at the moment for Nvidia users. Now of course this game is supporting various Nvidia technologies such as HBO+, TXAA and Ansel. So of course perhaps Nvidia users are going to have a better time, perhaps it's a global thing that is just more directly impact AMD users. It's hard to say as we only have this one report for the moment. Again, they are in Australia and this is why they're getting it a day before, but technically, you know, it's weird. But soon we will be getting reviews and early impressions from guys getting it today, because obviously this is the day before release, or maybe it's tomorrow. Sorry, no, it'd be tomorrow's the day before. Sorry, I got my days mixed up in my head. There are a lot of games coming out in the next few weeks. But regardless of all that, we'll be seeing some reports, hopefully, in the next couple of days from other people, and then we can learn if this is a issue across all of PC or a more specific one to AMD. But even if it is AMD only, this still isn't good, to be honest. So hopefully a day one patch will address this. Perhaps this is a pre-release issue, but unfortunately we're going to have to only wait and see. Thank you very much for watching though, guys. I will see you next time.